This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is Vanessa Marshall, Harrison Dula from Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
Joining us today for a cup of coffee to talk about the 6th episode in Season 1 of Disney Plus's Willow series. The episode is called The Prisoners of Skellin. I have two returning guests to Coffee with Kenobi. First, let's bring in Mr. Gregory Cass. Greg, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you so much. Happy New Year, Dan. It's wonderful to be here again.
Yes, well, thank you. It's Happy New Year to you. It's great to have you. I should probably call both of you doctors. I mean, that talk about rude, academically rude. Come on.
No problem at all.
Yeah, that actually sounds weird to me.
Okay, well, I will just silently bow in respect. Our other guest, you recognize her voice. She's been a very frequent guest recently to Coffee with Kenobi. Jen Sopchockchai. Jen, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. This will be a nice check-in because I was here for the beginning of the season, and to see kind of like how my thoughts of it have progressed. So I'm really happy to be here for this specific episode. Yes,
I am too. This is an interesting one. It's definitely. Let me check the time. I think it's the longest one. Let's see. The first one's 55. Yeah, this is in fact the longest episode. By 1 minute, Prisoners of Skellin. The heroes mount a rescue mission into the dread mines of Skellin. At the end of the 5th episode, Wildwood, the heroes were whisked away, almost literally, by the trolls, which I'm sure we will talk a lot about. But let's go ahead and we'll save our letter grade for the beginning. We're going to spend the entire episode kind of developing our and filling out our rubrics, our undisclosed rubrics for this review. Greg, let's start with you. What would be the one word you would use to describe this episode and overall thoughts on it?
Let me take those in reverse order. So I will just say that I'm not somebody who has a deep attachment to Willow. I actually never saw the movie as a young person. I saw it about a month ago when I unfortunately had a brief stint of COVID. So I came late to this. So I have very much enjoyed parts of the show so far, and this episode was no exception to that. So my one word will be, let's say, twisty.
Twisty. I like twisty. It's very good.
Like
Jen, what about you?
The mind.
Yes.
My one word would be adventure, because to me, this episode sort of clicked into another gear in terms of how invested I was in the adventure, the place they were in, the quest. There's a lot of, you can see the influence of Indiana Jones in this episode very heavily. We've had references in other episodes and homages to certain things from Indy, but I feel like this was like, when they're going to the tomb, it's very much like, oh, we're in an Indiana Jones movie now, which I loved.
Yeah, we're almost in the temple. I expected to see Sankara stones, didn't you?
Yeah.
The lighting and the bridges and there's some good stuff.
I think Luthen still has those, so they didn't get them back.
Oh, that's true. That's true. I'm not sure where they are on the timeline, but I think you're right. I would say puzzlingly intriguing. I'm going to hyphenate it. Puzzlingly intriguing. The puzzling part is at the end. We'll get to that. But this one I thought was the most effective, consistent narrative tonally from beginning to end. The humor, besides one moment, felt organic and much more loosely or sparingly used, I guess. Which I haven't minded the humor, but there are times where it might take you out of it for a moment. I don't feel like that happened here. I was really captivated by the trolls for a lot of interesting reasons, and it was cool to see a familiar face. Still not sure if he was used effectively, but we'll see. So where would you like to take this, Jen? We'll go in reverse order of how we introduced. What kind of stands out to you, or where do you want to kind of kick things off at?
Where do we start? So you mentioned the trolls. I'll pick up on that because that was one of sort of my most unexpected and or most pleasant surprises. because I think based on the aesthetic, I love a good troll mine, and based on the aesthetic, I was very much in a Lord of the Rings sort of mindset and expecting, basically orcs, but but they're called trolls. And then when we get these sort of like fussy bureaucratic, like intelligent, articulate trolls instead, I was really taken aback and amused. Like I found it to be very funny, and actually like a really nice subversion of sort of the trope. It really reminded me of H.G. Wells's Time Machine, the Morlocks, even down to their like the film adaptation from the 60s. I think they have this similar kind of hair, like the white, kind of the silver white hair, and the history or sort of the roots of that kind of character is pretty problematic, because it was sort of like a perversion or racist perversion of Darwin's natural selection. And so especially in H.G. Wells, like the Morlocks are definitely supposed to be this sort of like primitive version of man that's, inferior to the hoi polloi that are, up above. And so to me, it was really nice to sort of see an update of that trope and kind of a subversion of my expectations of that, sort of breaking away from that history. So, and it reminded me too of Beast from X-Men, in terms of like,
the articulate, mellifluous nature of these hairy creatures.
Yeah.
I'll just agree with that. I think, one of the things this show has as a kind of uphill battle is the fact that so much fantasy has been created between when the film happened and when this show happens. And I think when you enter into that space, you just have to engage with what's already come, right? It reminds me about how Avengers Endgame had to explain how this was not Back to the Future time travel. It had to be,
yes.
You have to grapple with it, even if you're differing from it. And so to everything Jen said, I thought this was a nice play on that. It's like, oh, we know you're expecting a snarling kind of grunting voice of some kind. So that probably for me was the biggest laugh of the episode. That worked for me a lot when they, and the fact, like you said, they were kind of fussy at all times. Felt a little C-3PO. There's a little shared DNA there.
And for some reason, these trolls have amazing abs. Yeah.
Well, they're constantly working out in the mine, right?
It's true. Well, but are they? Or are they making people do it for them? I guess it's all the walking.
Right. There are many
Perhaps.
levels, it sounds like.
We know they have healthy bowel movements because of how Borman escaped, so that's no problem. It's an interesting one because I did find it welcoming, and it reminded me of, remember those old syndicated shows, the Hercules one and then the Xena Warrior Princess.
Yes.
It kind of reminded me of a villain you might see in something like that. That's a bit of a long distance memory there. So I liked them. I thought that they worked. I felt like that wasn't forced in any way. And I found them refreshing. And I also welcome the fact that they were hyper intelligent and they had sort of their own little delicacies and tendencies about them, which I found refreshing. But they also were very much happy to let their prisoners rot and suffer and be afraid. So it's a very interesting paradox that you don't often expect. And I guess in retrospect, a show like this will probably do something like that because it does like to kind of walk that line. But I found this to be one of the more effective things throughout the series so far. But we also mentioned I mentioned at the beginning of the show that there's a familiar face, Christian Slater. He is Allagash. Now, initially, he says that he is not Allagash, but he's in fact Man Mardigan. I'm assuming, I think we've talked about it before, I'm assuming people know why the real Man Mardigan has not appeared. Of course, in real life, Val Kilmer, if you saw Top Gun Maverick, then you've seen it. But people also may very much be aware that he's very sick. I believe he has throat cancer, and he's basically retired from acting, so he wouldn't have been able to do that. So before we talk about Christian Slater's character of Allagash, how do you think this series, we could say this episode, how do you think this series would have been different if Matt Mardigan was in it?
I only recently, because I fell behind on podcasts, was listening to some beautiful pour over episodes where you were talking so much about Black Panther Wakanda Forever and how there was no way to do the film they wanted to. And so they found a way to make something new. And it struck me as very much the same problem here. So I think for me, the moment in this episode was when the character Willow, although it felt like Warwick saying, he said, for all the trouble he caused me, I really could have used him on this one. And it just felt like a little shout out to Val Kilmer saying, if we could have, we would have had you along and we really could have enjoyed you being here. So I definitely think it's not the choice you make if it's an option. I think you keep him in the mix because Val Kilmer is such a dynamic performer. And so that show then runs the risk of some of the criticisms of the sequel trilogy where you have these really compelling characters and you want to introduce these new characters. How do you keep the spotlight on them? So I think if anything, we just could have used a little bit of Mad Mardigan's twinkle, right? The show is struggling to find that twinkle, that kind of ha-ha, I will be the strongest fighter while wearing a woman's dress kind of scene. So a little more of that, I think, would have really helped the show along, despite many strengths of these younger performers.
Sure. Well, very well said.
Yeah, I think it was a really big challenge that they had to overcome because Mad Mardigan and Val Kilmer playing Mad Mardigan specifically is arguably one of the best things about the original film. It's peak Val Kilmer.
Yes.
And so
besides
the idea
Top
that so the idea that Warwick Davis is coming back, Joanne Whaley, I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, are coming back, and it's Sorsha and her children, and then the question of well, then where is Mad Mardigan if we actually can't have Val Kilmer join us? How do we get around that? How do we still make his presence felt without having him present? And so I thought that was, the way they have handled it so far, and specifically in this episode, I think to me seemed really well done because they're trying to kind of like Greg was saying, they need the sort of the sparkle that he had and the very distinct element, personality and kind of energy that he brought to the original film. I think they've tried to displace that onto other characters with Borman to a degree, but then also this Allagash with Christian Slater. And I think they're mostly there. And I think they did the smart thing of, we're not trying to give you a Mad Mardigan 2.0. We're just trying to give you characters who are distinct characters unto themselves, but who are providing that same energy, the sort of swashbuckling, kind of goofy, roguish sort of characters, but they're not, it's very clear that they're not there to replace Mad Mardigan. The other fun behind the scenes fact that I read up on is that it's actually Val Kilmer and Joanne Whaley's son who's the voice in the tomb. Jack Kilmer, I believe is his name. So it's clear that they've been very thoughtful about how to do this.
David W. Collins, Lucasfilm's sound maestro extraordinaire, so that they used his voice, and I think they spliced in some Val Kilmer too and modulated it, and it sounds amazing. It's a very loving homage, and I agree. I think the Mad Mardigan principle is sort of like trying to do the prequel trilogy without Harrison Ford. You just can't replace that archetype. And there really isn't anything even close to that in the prequel trilogy. But in this, you've got your Bormans, you've got the snarkiness of some of the other characters. But I feel like Mad Mardigan in this story would have maybe overshadowed things a little bit. And as much as I miss him, I liked how this ensemble cast has sort of taken on this mantle and sort of done something unique with it. It does make for a different audience, perhaps, but I think it works to that degree. So, but let's talk about the character that is here. Allagash, played again by Christian Slater, I've always liked Christian Slater. He's like a lot of some iconic actors in Hollywood. They're pretty much playing themselves, but they play themselves so well that we just don't care. And I feel like that's his way. So Allagash at first says that he's Mad Mardigan for a really long time. And then we get into some some muddy storytelling, I think, and maybe that's by design. I'm not quite sure about that. And I don't mean that to be as a pejorative, but I do mean, so it's unclear why Allagash and Borman don't like each other. They both basically say, no, it's actually, you're the traitor, you're the turtling, not me. And it's never, ever clear. And it appears that Allagash is dead, unless he has some sort of heroic resurgence, which of course would not be unlikely to happen in the mythology. So I guess I'm not sure. I mean, I really enjoyed him. I liked him being a foil for Borman because there really isn't a physical equal to Borman in this series so far. I like that part of it, and maybe there's some ambiguity there, but part of me still feels like I feel like I'm missing a page or something like that.
Yeah, I think I had to. I felt like I was inferring a lot, but where I ultimately landed was that Borman is relative to Allagash telling the truth, and because the way they
I
set
felt the
up,
opposite.
Really?
I think I landed on the opposite
Yeah.
too.
Oh
yeah.
no! So yeah, because to me it seemed, well, maybe it's just because I like Borman better as a character, and he's been around longer. But to me it felt like, because they set up, it's sort of like, Greg said twisty at the top of the conversation. I think the teasing of he's hiding something, I think it's a twist that it's like, oh, actually the biggest mistake of his life was leaving Mad Mardigan behind, as opposed to trying to steal the cuirass. So that's how I interpreted it, and that was like a half a line, I feel like, towards the end of the episode where he says like the biggest mistake of my life or something like that. That was sort of where what I gravitated towards to kind of interpret what the truth was. But I do think that it is very ambiguous, and to me, like, Dan, you mentioned muddy storytelling. I feel like they really were trying to lean into the unreliable narrator, as they sort of set up last week, with like, what they're showing us is different from what Borman's telling Scorpio, right? So
Yes.
To me, I think they just it just sort of like got away from them. They were like, oh, like, wouldn't it be fun to have these roguish characters who are like, you don't know when they're telling the truth and when they're lying, but they kind of lost sight of the fact that we as viewers still need concrete truth to hold on to, of like, wait, so where are we in relation to these characters? So yeah, I think I totally hear your response to that.
Yeah, unreliable narrative is a great catch, because we still need an anchor. Greg, what do you think?
Well, I was just, as I am wont to do, thinking of Last Jedi and how, you get Luke's version and Kylo's version, and then you get the kind of middle version, or, so you kind of see the truth. And you're right, we missed that one. And I'll just add, I think you're both right that it was purposefully muddy and meant to kind of confuse you a little and who to trust. But for me, the kind of notch too far is to also throw in these kind of MacGuffin objects into the mix, which I don't entirely understand. And then we get them both and we reunite them, and then they don't work for at least, Allagash. So I think those two components being mixed together was a bit too much for me, and I definitely couldn't tell exactly what was going on. I'm not even sure if this spreads throughout the country, but I will say up here in the Northeast, Allagash is a brewery that makes delicious beer. So that was all I was really thinking about every time his name came up.
Right on. We're gonna have to take me to that one day.
Is it Allagash White?
Yes, the white ale is the popular
yeah.
one.
I remember
yes,
that
absolutely.
One, yeah.
Interesting.
So
Well,
go
ahead.
Do we even think that what they think is the cuirass is real? That was sort of my thing too, where I was like, I don't even know.
I sure hope not, because that was very.
Because it looks
it
looks very flimsy.
Yeah, I don't think that's it, but I am apt to, or I'm inclined to agree with you on this, Greg. Why, at this point, why do I care? Besides a fun little story, I think in the second or third episode, I'm still not sure what benefit it has, but what's our chosen, MacGuffin here? Is it the fact when Elora is going to discover her powers and fully just own the mantle, or is it going to be some armor that protects one guy? You know what I mean? I mean, this is not a mutually exclusive concept, but again, I feel like that's part of the trick of this trickly narrative that I sometimes have a hard time really biting my teeth into. And I really want to. I really want this to be the scrumptious sirloin that I can just sink my teeth into. And maybe I'm expecting too much. I don't know. I don't think so.
I kept coming back to, so I was very far behind on this show, and after your invitation caught up, and as I was watching, I kept coming back to that it was really well made, to your point, that that you want there to be really good substance there, because clearly the costumes and the creature effects and all the familiar names in the production are so well done, and it means that, you know, it should be on par with some of the big fantasy shows on other streaming services, and there's something holding it back, and I think it's a little of this muddiness, and to your use of kind of this trickling out of details in which direction it's very much like a stream, and it hits a rock and it branches, and I'm never entirely sure which branch I really want to follow or who's going to be the main thrust of the story. And that's something the film actually did pretty well. It set up some clear goals, and it was a kind of traditional quest movie, and kind of went through with it. So it is, I think they're struggling despite, again, just, you know, good acting and fun characters and production design.
So I like the stream metaphor, because I think that might be a good way to describe it. I feel a little thirsty after. Like, you know, I feel like I've been quenched, but I just don't feel, I don't know. I don't really have anything to compare it to, because I know this is very much a separate thing. I still enjoy the series. I'm still recommending the series, but I just feel like there's something missing, and maybe it's all encompassed, or is encompassed around the character of Willow himself. I'm 6 episodes in, if there are 8 left, I still don't know what to make of Willow. He's the titular character, but I think you could argue it shouldn't be called Willow. Like Willow and his amazing friends. I don't know what you call it, but that would be very Spidey-ish, wouldn't it? But I don't know. Like where it throws for me is that just when I start to like him and really like feel like a connection with him, then Allura and Willow reunite, and I forget who initiates it, but one of them says, "I miss you," and I was like, "Well, I kind of miss you too." Oh, so I think it was Willow that says, "I kind of miss you too." Okay, so if Willow, like, this is a romantic tension. If Willow is like this reluctant mentor, which I do again like that angle, the reluctant mentor concept, why is he have to be reluctant about owning the fact that he misses this person who he has a magical and spiritual connection with? That didn't work for me at all. That's the one part of this whole episode that really took me out of it completely. And I scratched my head thinking, why? What are we gaining here?
I just feel like he probably just hasn't had his moment yet, right? Because we got the truth from the previous episode 5, where he confides in Graydon about how he feels like a hack, and like he you know, everyone assumes he's this great sorcerer, and really he just was lucky in the original film. And I feel like the logical step from that is for him to tell that to Allura, so that she can, because she's also going through this imposter syndrome of like, you know, everyone is acting like I'm the most important thing in the whole world, and I don't feel like it. Like, I don't feel like I should be the one who's saving everybody else. And so I feel like they just need to sync up, or at least this is what I want. They need to sync up so that they can better understand each other, because I think, you know, for me at least, oftentimes as a teacher with my own students, I feel like when I'm meeting them where they are and sort of telling them, like, I either am currently or was once where you are right now, and I understand how you feel about this. That's sort of what unlocks a teaching moment oftentimes. And so to me, I feel like that's what I'm waiting for. I hope we get that in the last 2 episodes. But yeah, otherwise, like, I was looking through my notes just now. I didn't take a single note about Willow from this episode.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. You're both describing, when I talk about pedagogy, it's about empathy and understanding who these students are, and that's what's lacking here. Is I think to Willow, that is still a baby, right? The baby he rescued and all those years ago, and more like a symbol as well, right? That it's the salvation of the world, but it's not actually a human person that he's engaged with. So maybe that's why he can't even miss her, because he's a thing, or she's a thing to him.
Right.
And maybe to that, I'll just tack on. I think my struggle with Willow is the character that is I think I know Warwick Davis too much. And so I see him and I think of, his fantastic Life's Too Short show where he has, some real humor. And I read his autobiography a good number of years ago. And I know all the kind of quirks and humor he has. And so when, I believe in this episode, Willow says, "Where's the loo?" That just felt to me like that's a Warwick joke. That's not the character of Willow. Like Warwick probably came up on that in the moment. So all of that I think is working against him. And I feel like it's unfair criticism because it's my baggage, not anything he's bringing to the performance, but it's tricky for me.
It is. And I still am, pedagogically, I remember Ron Clark is a great pioneering educator for elementary students. And I heard him speak once and he said, I don't have to like all of my students, but I do have to care about them. I really like that a lot for a lot of wonderful reasons. But regardless of how you feel about your students, I just thought it was awkward. It was just awkward dialogue, like episode 2 level awkward dialogue. And that was unfortunate because I think the role and the actor is better than that. So we'll move on from that. The Willow angle itself and the magic. Where are we on Allura, and what is her? I believe it was Anthony King a few weeks ago who said we're still not sure how the magic works in Willow, and that's absolutely spot on. I'm still trying to figure out, and I'm enjoying seeing her lack of understanding of her place in this universe. I almost said galaxy, her place in this universe, her identity crisis, and imagine all these expectations and pressure on you to be the ultimate savior. And the imposter syndrome, it seems authentic here. I think let me look up the actor's name. Is it Ellie Bamber?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. I think she's terrific in this show. She's very effective. She says a lot with her expressions, but I'm enjoying seeing it. But then there are times when, and I don't want to be the wet blanket of the episode, but when I wish I could see a little bit more. And I love ambiguity. I like the intellectual side of this, obviously, but I want to see some bridges to. I don't get it, and sometimes I get it so well, and sometimes I can't even pronounce these words that are somewhat Latin / gibberish, and then other times I'm just like a sage. So I don't know. What do you think?
I think I agree that it's not entirely clear, or like if you asked me to explain exactly how the magic works of the show, I don't know if I could do it.
Couldn't.
That said, I feel like they're doing a lot with Allura in this episode in terms of showing how, as she says, I feel like every time I try to control the magic, it feels like it's slipping away. And so it's sort of this thing that's beyond her control, but is growing in power, I think. And so because for me, it was and it was like a very subtle moment. I almost missed it, but there were 2 times in the episode where she kind of like looks down into the mines, and then you hear what I realized after kind of like rewinding it was Kit's voice, and then I put the captions on because I was like, well, what is she saying? And she's prophesizing the end of the episode, or she's it's a vision that she's having, or kind of like she's predicting what's happening at the episode, because it's the line that Kit says of like, why I really need to know why he always chose you instead of me. It's that kind of like really, which is a beautiful moment. It's like very emotionally climactic for those 2 characters. And so I like that, but I was like, if I hadn't gone through the trouble of like rewinding and turning on the captions, I would have totally missed that. And they had also in the previous episode talked about how there's sort of a checklist of the she's like, well, I just need to do divination and like telekinesis is that I'm good, right? Like, and so I feel like that's what they're doing, is that they're slowly working through that list of abilities, and then at the end, I guess, like, she'll be complete. But beyond that, and there's also a thing going on with when she says when she's really close to the crone, right? She gets this panicky feeling, or it seems like her magic is activating more around her, right? Because they show the elixir starts bubbling more, and things start shaking, and so but it's again, it's not clear sort of what is happening, and maybe that's a surprise, and that's the point, is like, well, there'll be an explanation of it later.
I hope so.
Yeah, and I think we're mixing in a lot of Kit discussion naturally here because of that end of that episode. And as I think through my mythology studies and so on, and Kit here is at the bottom of the hero's journey, right? She finally has to really experience the loss of her father. So he's gone for good. He's outside of her reach. And that's usually the moment when the hero meets with the great truth that they'll bring back to society. And the fact that she's left with protect Alora, and that's so personally devastating to her is really, really compelling, and probably my favorite moment in this episode as we were unpacking it. But it's hard not to feel that Alora is just kind of stuck in the middle of that story instead of really experiencing something on her own. And to tie that back to the moment Dan talked about, then we have now, and I would put her earlier conversation with Graydon into this mix, is she has a lot of people who are compelled to connect with her and yet seem unable to connect with her. And so much of her kind of backstory is kind of foggy still, like the years she spent in hiding as the Muffin Maid. But I think I don't necessarily expect more revelations, but I think there's something there about maybe they intended her to be very sheltered, and so she's unable to make these connections. And maybe that just limits your ability to do magic. Who knows? I don't know the rules either.
Well, no, yeah, that's interesting. I like that. No, I think the Kit moment, her sort of reluctant epiphany is really beautiful. I think that is the best emotional beat in this entire series. It's really extraordinarily done. It's well acted. The execution of it is brilliant. And you suddenly realize, okay, this is beyond just some sort of shallow, silly teen drama. This is like, why did my father pick you over me? We don't know how much time she got to spend with her father, how much her real memories are of her father, besides the fact that he is her father and, this mythological knight hero person. To me, that was why this episode is stood out to me so well, besides the humor of the trolls. It's interesting to try to figure out, besides the concept of a reluctant mentor, we've got a reluctant hero who very much stays in the early parts of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey for a really long time. And maybe that's part of the challenge too of the series, is we've got so many characters in such a small amount of time to get to know them, because 8 episodes is not a lot of time. It's a very, very small amount of time. So I hope we get to see more of that, because I've always liked Kit, but this episode made me love her because of how it was done.
See, for me, I was annoyed by her initially. I did not like her. She was probably at the bottom of my list in terms of characters that I personally connected with, because to me, she felt sort of like whiny and entitled. And then this episode made me realize, okay, she is on this. She and Alora are two sides of this prophecy coin, where they're both feeling the burden of it in different ways, right? That she is grappling with trying to understand why everyone acts like Alora is the key to everything. She doesn't seem like that big of a deal to me. So what is going on? Right. And whereas all the other characters around her so very blindly buy into it, right? It's a foregone conclusion, and she's actually taking the time to question, like, well, why is it that we're like, what, why are you the most important thing that matters? And whereas Alora feels like the pressure of having to be this chosen one figure, right? Of where she's like, especially since she spent her whole life not thinking that she was a Laura Tannen, right?
Right.
And so she's really struggling with everyone's looking to me, but I can't. I'm not the one they should be looking for. I'm going to disappoint everybody. So, to me, that really felt like that this is the heart of the show. That the two of them, and I never would have guessed that. I think I would have sort of dismissed Kit as a more secondary character.
Sure, and understandably so. And I think that's what makes this cliffhanger so great, because you're still like, all right, I'm emotionally invested. Oh, geez, now what are we going to do? So, Greg, you haven't gotten a chance to bring up a topic yet. So are there any things in your notes that are jumping out that we haven't discussed yet that you'd like to talk about?
We hit on most of what I said in my list. I do have, I had a lot of fun playing find the Lucasfilm comparison, because as Jen pointed, there's some Temple of Doom and a Last Crusade moment with the shifting camera angle and so on.
Yes.
And I also thought parts of the mind sneaking had just a little bit of A New Hope Death Star vibe to them, kind of on the edge of these chasms, and
no bad guys around when they don't need to be there.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess the piece that I'll raise is we begin and end with Airk, and the Lucasfilm DNA I saw there was the Clone Wars episode. Is it called Into the Void? I want to say
yes.
Sunny Day in the Void.
Sunny Day in the Void. One of my favorite episodes.
he marches off and returns to the city. And I think the way I'd phrase this is, in all that we just discussed, we kind of forget him as a MacGuffin, and whereas Kit is kind of dealing with across the last couple episodes, the fact that she's the granddaughter of the evil sorceress and the daughter of Matt Mardigan. You would think Airk would be experiencing all of that, and yet seems very separate. So I don't know. I feel like I'm on the other show I do, where I'm asking a question instead of giving a statement. But how do you think Airk fits into all this? Because that's the piece I'm struggling with.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
I have a lot of thoughts on this, actually. One thing I do like about this show is that it's the inclusivity is really nice. I think it's cool that we've got, instead of the ancient concept of a damsel in distress and the princess rescue, we've got it's the other way around. I love that. I love the gender reversal, and that is becoming more of the norm, thankfully. He is interesting because he's not interesting at all. The first episode, he was fascinating. And I liked that there was more to the shallow, handsome fellow than we were originally led to believe. But we see at the end of this episode that he actually is that shallow. He actually is. We've been talking about the music a lot, and oh geez, I'm trying to think of a polite way to say this. That was brutal. It was brutal at the end. I don't remember the music. Is it
Good Vibrations at the very end?
The Beach Boys.
Jeez, it's even worse. Brian Wilson, if he was dead, would be rolling in his grave. Because he goes through this massive. He goes through a journey in the episode, and he's crawling through this dirt, and it's sort of confusing to see where he is and which way is up. It's kind of if you're reading. Or if you read the new Stephen King book, Fairy Tale, have you read that?
I haven't.
I could not recommend it more highly. It's fabulous. But there's a great sequence in the middle where the main character is lost, and it's impossible to know where he is by looking at the horizon. It kind of reminds me of that. And then at the end, he sees this woman who at first I thought was Kit with a wig, a really bad wig. And then I realized, no, that's not. It's just when it looks sort of like her. And then he looks at her, and it appears, based on the Brian Wilson tune, that he's falling in love at the end. And I just thought, I'm sorry, but how groin-centric is this guy? Come on. I just found it really shallow and cheap. I mean,
you gave him the benefit of the doubt, and he disappointed you.
Very much so. I just think, okay, what in the world? Why am I spending my time with this guy? He's in love with Allura, who he calls Dove, but then after being stranded and having this sort of realization that I got to grow up, something is clearly wrong here. Where's my sister? Where's my family? Oh, she's pretty. I mean, come on. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. It just drove me nuts.
Yeah, I guess I totally agree with everything you just said. For me, where I kind of deflected my mind to when I was kind of like being disappointed like you was, this feels like the sort of fairy tale trap of like, this is like, she's actually the crone.
Yes.
And trying to trick him, right? Like that's kind of where my mind went in a way that made it okay for me. But because I'm like, we only have 2 episodes left. Who is this person? Like,
right.
And that then made me retroactively wonder, is Mad Mardigan's voice in the tomb actually Mad Mardigan at all? Or is that also the crone trying to lure? Because I sort of saw a symmetry between Kit, sort of, because she walks towards the light in a very sort of like almost like she's entranced. And obviously she has an emotional reason to be doing that, but that seemed to me, I read that as kind of a little bit more like she's not even in control of what she's doing. She's just kind of being drawn in like a siren song. So to me, I kind of saw that as a parallel, that since they are both, and then that would make the line about the blood of Bavmorda runs through your veins, like that would make that useful. Right, from a storytelling perspective, because then it's like, oh, okay, they're the two who are going to be tempted, and they will have to resist the crone's influence.
You're probably right. I hope you are.
It makes me, again, back to the rules of what is magic. I keep forgetting that we're also dealing with multiple dimensions here. So is Mad Mardigan somewhere in a different dimension, and is Airk in that same dimension, or is he actually in reality? The sequence, other than that Clone Wars episode, it reminded me too of the final Harry Potter book. Harry goes and sees Dumbledore one last time in this kind of ethereal plane, and Dumbledore's great line, like, just because it happened in your head doesn't mean it's not real. And it felt like we could be doing something there as well. Is he actually in, a torture rack somewhere, and these are his experiences, and his psyche is tempting him with some good vibrations, or is this literal? But when Jen was talking, I like this idea that maybe it turns out the last 2 episodes are about defeating Airk, who's fallen to the dark side or given into the crone in some ways. It's a little hard because Graydon was already pulled back from a possession. It feels like we wouldn't necessarily get that exact same beat again. So,
but that was his second
else,
time.
I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
Well, if it is a torture rack, I feel like I am living vicariously, having to go through that sequence. Let's talk about Graydon. He is, since he's a lovesick puppy dog, he's a little less interesting and a little less mature. But I think he's been so, square peg round hole situation, pushed into this mantra of royalty, when he really just wants to be a kid or be an adolescent and fall in love. And Allura apparently is leaning that direction, or at least she was for one episode. And I don't know. I keep thinking, here's the thing. Look, people have been listening to the show for a while, whether it's been a while or a little bit. No, I like a good story. I like a good story well told. I like ambiguity. I like having to think. I like not having all the answers. But I also want consistency in my characters. That's why I struggled and still struggle with The Rise of Skywalker for the Poe character, for some of the other things that happened in that show. And why I think The Last Jedi is perfection. Because it takes what we know about these characters and gives it layers and complexity and a realism. And I'm just not finding that. And again, maybe I just need to come to grips with the fact that maybe I'm not this specific audience. Maybe a crusty English teacher is in the audience for Willow. Maybe that's possible.
So you're recreating a conversation I have a lot with my co-host on my Wheel of Time podcast. And what he would say, were he here, is remember that teenagers aren't consistent. And I think, we demand something of those characters in stories because that's how stories function and how we relate to them and draw ourselves in. But in reality, he could be, not sure of himself, and then a lovesick puppy, and then all over the map. Now, I'm just describing that to my co-host. I'm with you. I want this guy, especially because I have such deep affection for that actor, Tony Revolori from Flash and from especially The Lobby Boy and Grand Budapest Hotel, one of my favorite movies. So I really want more from him. But the only other thought I had is it is, again, what you were talking about Airk being the damsel in distress, the gentleman in distress. It is an inversion of another type, that oftentimes the female character has a betrothal and is actually in love with somebody else and doesn't get developed as who she would be. So now we're just going to leave Tony here as a bit of a blank, Graydon, not the actor. So maybe it is just another version of that inversion.
I like a version of that inversion. Well, I like that. I like that. I don't know. What other stones have we not uncovered yet as we get closer to revealing our grades, which mine is fluctuating all the time. I've erased and repenciled in my rubric several times throughout this episode.
I only have a shout out to the riddles. I thought the riddles were really fun. I have some questions about that whole sequence, but the actual, whenever there's a riddle in a story, if I can't get it immediately, I'm like, all right, you've got me. You're pretty clever. So,
or not to think of Gollum in Bilbo, right? Which is perfection.
True.
Right.
True.
I liked that they got it right away for the first one, but then it took a super long time to figure out the second one. I felt like, to me, that was sort of commenting on how in these adventure stories, oftentimes the riddles are too quickly, like they just breeze through them in a lot of ways. And so I thought that was, I liked that. And then they had a chance to kind of pace and stew.
Did the verisimilitude of that sequence bother either of you, that the second riddle? And clearly, this is not the Sphinx from Oedipus Rex, right? Did it bother you that they had so long, and it was just like a repeating message over and over again? It there was no sense of danger or panic once I realized this is just going to keep going and going. And even the characters are like, don't even seem to be all that concerned with it. That it was I think that was a bit of a missed opportunity.
Yeah, have the ceiling coming down like in Temple of Doom or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Give me cost, right? Give me a reason to be concerned, because then it amps the emotion. Imagine if there was, and then Kit survives that, and then she falls into that lava pool. Imagine how much more emotional that would have been.
Yeah.
To me, the tomb actually almost had kind of a carnival feeling to it, where especially the voice of, and I'm forgetting his name now, of the Ellen
Wiggleheim.
Wiggleheim. Thank you. I was gonna make you say it, not me. But yeah, to me, like the movement and the voice made me feel like there was sort of a sham element to it, almost, of like
Wizard of Oz.
It was like exactly, Wizard of Oz. And then that made me wonder, the room that they start that Borman and Allagash start frantically rifling through. To me, that seemed like a decoy.
Yeah, same. Especially with the cuirass seemed to be just a piece of brass or something.
Right. And so, but again, they didn't really give us enough to draw any actual substantial conclusions from that. I feel like so, unless we revisit it here, I don't know what to make of it. But that's sort of why I thought the actual like life and death stakes didn't seem as high.
Yeah, it's funny because there was a nice little metatextual joke. I think it was the last episode, the the fifth, where somebody says, we're tired of your side quests, right? Like they're like, oh, we're gonna know what the audience is posting online before this even airs. And because all of that amounted to so little, it just feels like this was a distraction before going on to something bigger and better. Because like you said, yeah, it did feel like a decoy, or it had already been ransacked and some such. But there's no way we're going back there. There's no way there's some added revelation to that. So it just seems, like, okay, now let's go to the real story.
Right, absolutely. All right, well, let's do this, and let's go ahead and give our letter grades and try to sort of explain and ration them out. Who would like to go first?
I'll go first. So
Okay.
I actually came into this thinking I was going to give it an A because I've been fairly up and down and sort of mixed on the season so far. But to me, this felt like clearly the strongest episode, just in terms of the contained story within it. But now that we've picked it apart, I feel like I've talked now.
Sorry.
Now I feel like I want to go down. It sort of feels like when you read a student paper really quickly and you're like, oh, that was pretty good. And then you go back to read it more carefully later and you're like, oh, wait, I'm noticing all these things now. So to me, I probably would need to go down to an A- because I feel like relative to the other episodes we've gotten, this one was very strong. I felt like it had very clear emotion. While even though the storytelling is muddy in terms of the logistics and sort of like what's happening and what does this all mean and where the lore and all that sort of stuff, to me, the emotional beats were so very clear and the emotional stakes were so very high for all of the characters, but primarily for Allura and Kit and Borman too, which we didn't really talk about. That he seems to be going through this big struggle where, like, he was sort of hiding behind his swashbuckliness for most of the season and his sarcasm, and then these last two episodes 5 and 6, seem to really be kind of making him more vulnerable in a way that I liked. So to me, I still have to go A- for all those reasons. I can ignore all the other stuff that we've been nitpicking.
All right. Greg?
Filling in my rubric, I will say I'm really trying hard to grade this as an episode of the show it is, and not some other show or the show I imagined Willow could be, because that is always how I approach such tasks. It's not the assignment I gave; it's what they were able to make of it. And I think it's going to be a B+ for me. And I'm going to say that, a lot of things were working so much better here than in previous episodes. And I think Dan alluded to the humor was working a little better. Jen just referring to all those great emotional moments. I think it was a B for me, but then that great moment with Kit, she earned the extra half letter grade for the group project and bumped it up to a B+ for me. And yet I'm, like a real college professor, when I give a B+, I know I'll be hearing from that student to talk about how it's not an A-. So I know that my decision is not final on this. And after we see where these last couple episodes go, I may revisit this and curve it a little.
That is actually a great transition to why I struggle with the Hunger Games series. Because I feel like if I have to wait for the rest of it to care about the individual parts, that's problematic for me. But it's pretty apt to the idea of I got to grade this on a scale of what the show is and what it's told me that it is, not what I want it to be or not how I would do it. And overall, I'm pretty good about that. And this one is more of a challenge for me. I was going to give it a B+. Generous B+, but after hearing some of our commentary and being reminded of Good Vibrations, it's a very, very generous B-, a very generous B-, because I will grade it on what I've been given. What I've been given is inconsistent in tone, structurally. I don't know if it's inconsistent structurally because it's been consistently inconsistent. And I struggle with that as a person who loves story and storytelling and breaking them down and really pouring into them and what works and what doesn't. More often than not, it works. I love these characters a lot. And I feel like instead of spending the money on the royalties for these songs, maybe give the script another pass. Maybe fill in a few more of these gaps without dumbing it down for us. I definitely don't want to be dumbed down. I want to be thought of as an intelligent viewer. But I also think that I shouldn't have to be like, well, okay, I'll give that a pass. I feel like I said that multiple times every week. And it's because I love Lucasfilm and fantasy and storytelling so much that I find myself, I won't say struggling, but kind of coasting instead of savoring. So there we have it. There we have. Well, there are two left. There are two left. Maybe that will change, and who knows? I'm definitely looking forward to it. I'm certainly not going to miss it, and I would strongly encourage you listening here on the show to make sure not to miss the awesome exploits of both Greg and Jen. Thank you both, as always, for joining me on Coffee with Kenobi. Always a pleasure and a delight to have you both on and to learn from the two of you. Greg, where can people find you and all of your great work?
Thank you so much for the invitation and really making sure I kept up with Willow, because you're right. All my criticism aside, it's worth seeing. It's new Lucasfilm, and what have they given us but great adventures our whole lives? So, yes. Boy, the best place to find me is after you get up tomorrow morning and decide whether you're doing Willow or Bad Batch first. If you choose Bad Batch, you can find me over on Greg McLaughlin's Rebel Base Card podcast. We're doing our Bad Batch recaps starting up this weekend. So that's a great place to find me. And then I'm at Ion Cannon on Instagram. And Hive, are we still on Hive? I think we're still on Hive. We'll see. I'm there.
It's hanging on by a thread.
Yeah, it lost a chunk, but it's there. So EYEONCANON.
And Jen, what about you?
Sure. So you can find my writing at thelongtake.substack.com. It's a hybrid blog and newsletter, and I review lots of things, but very consistently every new Marvel or Star Wars show or film. So I am, I've had an adequate rest over the holiday season. I'm ready to cover Bad Batch. I'm really excited. And it's also Oscar season's heating up, so I'm going to try to squeeze in some reviews for that, especially as we get closer. I'm a big Oscar pool prediction nerd, and so I'll be doing, helping you with your own Oscar pool there if you'd like. And you can find me on Instagram at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI. And you can find me on Hive at Qui-Gon Jinn.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here. Move along.